Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Eau Rouge podcast. It's just me today for your ears once again, and I'll keep flying the flag for the Eau Rouge podcast. Chris, I'm sure, will be back next week. And of course, today we're talking about the Singapore Grand Prix that happened a few days ago now. Apologies for uploading this quite late, but we've got some. It was a strange race. Well, I say it was a strange race. I say it was an odd race, but actually, I think there's been a safety car at Singapore. For every single time it's been on the calendar, or every single year that we've raced there. So maybe it's not so strange that we had safety cars. We know what to expect. But then maybe it was more the frequency with which we were getting them, or the safety car and then the virtual safety car, and all the kind of ins and outs of that. So of course we'll talk about that and how it affected the race. And obviously, Checo Perez going on to win the Grand Prix, many arguing that this was his best race win so far, or his best race, if you like, so far. So we'll certainly talk about that. And then any kind of permutations in the championship, and of course the rain-affected race that we had as well. Max Verstappen and his unusually low finish, although we have many explanations for that. And talking about some of the other teams that maybe did quite well. So let's start with the race, with the race winner, Checo Perez. I've got to say, I think I'm probably in agreement with what everybody's been saying, that it was his best race win. It's one of those races where Hamilton used to win them very often, where there was lots of, I suppose stoppages is a word that you could use, or moments in the race, disruptions to the race. And Hamilton, being often the superior car, would be out front and winning those races most normally. And he would often get out of the car at the end of those races and say how it wasn't as easy as it looks, how it was a really challenging race, despite the fact that he was out front for the whole time. He would often say those were his most difficult races. And it's something that we saw from Checo today, I think, with all the disruption that goes on in the race, with all the safety cars and virtual safety cars, and of course, near the end of the race, well, maybe 10, 15 laps before the end of the race, he was under pressure from Charles Leclerc as well, managed to hold him off. So he wasn't just out front on his own the whole time, and he brought the car home. Now, obviously, he did get his 5-second penalty, which we've now learned, for being not within 10 car lengths of the safety car. And he did receive his 5-second penalty for that. But because of the strength of his pace at the end of the Grand Prix, he managed to pull so far away from Leclerc that it didn't matter in the end, and he took the race win. I was surprised, I have to say, by the decision that the stewards took to investigate it after the race, because we know Formula One, and we've seen it along for many, many years, those of us who've been watching it for a long time, and we know that it's never really been comfortable for people, for us as an audience, or for the drivers, or for anyone involved in F1, including the stewards, to leave a decision until after the race, and to not have, to have the podium where we don't know for sure, for certain, who the winner is. And so I was surprised. I feel like that decision could definitely have been dealt with. I think there was enough time at the end of the race, from when it happened, to be able to investigate it and then to deliver that penalty. Perhaps they didn't want to, I don't know, they didn't want to affect the outcome of the race. Obviously, if they announced that Checo's got a 5-second penalty during the race, then that could change things. But at the same time, we sort of saw it coming. We've seen it. I think it happened to Vettel a few years ago, where he got punished for that, and he received the same punishment, and they took that into account, I believe, the stewards, when they were making the decision. And so we all sort of saw it coming, really. And did we really need... And in fact, Red Bull saw it coming, and they said that we needed to build that gap to Ferrari, and they did do that, which ultimately, of course, led to Checo winning the race. So I did find it a bit of a strange decision to do that, but ultimately it didn't affect the outcome of the race, did it? I think Checo drove really strongly in conditions which obviously many people found very difficult. There were lots of cars sliding off. Even, one of the greatest of all time, Lewis Hamilton, ended up with a sort of banzai move. Well, I say banzai. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh there. I think the move was definitely on, but he couldn't get the car stopped in time. Planted it into the barrier. Pretty much full face first, which I think meant that he did not retire, because obviously if he had gone in sideways, he might have broken the suspension or lost a wheel. And so, that he did that. And of course, we had lots of other drivers that were making those mistakes. Verstappen as well. We'll come to him a bit later, doing a similar thing. But it was a really good drive, I thought, from Checo in very challenging conditions in Singapore after the huge downpour that they had. And the track was not drying very quickly. Obviously, it's nighttime, so no sun there to do so. And I suppose you're not really going fast enough to really push the water out to the side quickly. And so, creating that dry line as we would normally see in racetracks races during the day, where we can really distinctly see that dry line forming. Obviously, we did see it as the race went on, but it was nowhere near as quick as other racetracks that we race at during the day. And so it was not easy conditions at all. And also, I think credit needs to go to Charles Leclerc as well. A lot has been made about his mistake in France and Ferrari's mistakes in general, but he kept with Checo the whole way, and didn't do enough to win the race. Of course, didn't have enough at the end to get past Checo, but he did keep the car on the track. Checo and Leclerc were miles ahead of everybody else. I mean, if you look at Carlos Sainz, who, I have to say, I was quite shocked that he came in third. I don't think he put in a fantastic performance. Maybe on the face of it, looking at it, saying, well, he got third place, you can't argue that. But I would probably say that he was nowhere near the pace of his teammate, and he was nowhere near the pace of Checo Perez either, but still managed to get third. So it was a good race for Ferrari, but nobody really had what Checo had out there. And I've got to say, I thought that was a really, really good win for him, and probably his best. Let's talk about some goings on a bit further down the field. Obviously, I've already mentioned Lewis Hamilton, unfortunately, just ruining his race really with the move that he made. I know that, like I said earlier, the move was on, but I'm not so sure. He won't be happy with it, obviously, and it did ruin his race. I stuck my neck out very, 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 very far before the race began when I was messaging Chris about who I thought was going to win. And I put Hamilton down. I thought that Mercedes looked quite good this weekend. I thought that he was going to have a good race start. I thought his experience would count for a lot. And he did look fast compared to maybe previous races that we've seen from the Mercedes or from him. Obviously, his teammate George Russell was nowhere near really. Wasn't there to help him out. He was more the canary down the mine for changing of the tyres to see whether it worked to move on to slicks, when the right time was. So it was a disappointing race for Lewis. But what did surprise me, actually, and I think this was something that was maybe picked up on at the beginning of the race, but that Lewis said that he wanted to start on full wets. And who knows what that would have led to. I mean, the whole pack, every single driver, started on the inters, which from what I gather was the reason that they decided to go with the inters rather than the full wets. But it would have been quite interesting to see, and I don't think really Lewis has got much to lose. It would have been quite nice to see him doing that and to see how well they would have gone. The inters lasted for a very long time, as we spoke about already. The track dried out very, very quickly. Very, very slowly. The track was wet in many places. He probably could have moved the car around on the track to keep picking up the water, and it wouldn't have dried out as quickly as anywhere else. But as it turns out, he didn't, and he still had decent pace again compared to this season, I would say. Certainly not compared to the likes of Checo and Leclerc, but it was a decent race for him up until he sort of threw it into the barrier. Like I said, he planted the car face first into the barrier, and I think he did that. He could see what he was doing. He did it deliberately. He knew he was going to crash. He just needed to figure out a way to stay in the race, really, and that's what he did, which obviously we didn't see from a few other drivers who ended up retiring in the race. So not a great race for him or Mercedes in general, which really is a shame. And I think what's interesting as well is that we've got Verstappen, who had a rare off day, I suppose you could say. Obviously didn't qualify particularly strongly, and then ended up just kind of stuck around the back of the grid. I think that it was nice. I'll be honest. It's nice to see someone other than Max Verstappen this season doing well. I think we all know he's going to win the title. I think we all know that he's the best driver at the moment. He's in great form. He's got the best car, and he's got the bit between his teeth. And I think that it was just nice to see him not. Because, I mean, the last couple of races that he's won, he has started from the back of the grid and he's gone on to win them. And he just carves through the field so easily. And it's really nice to see the fact that he struggled a little bit today, and to see him and Lewis fighting on track, for position. Obviously, we would love to see them fighting for first and second, but fighting somewhere for points is okay. We'll take that, I suppose. It was good fun to see. I think when Hamilton tried a move earlier on in the race before he crashed into the barrier, he actually did come back onto the track and sort of blocked Verstappen. And maybe I'm trying to create a story out of nothing, but it was quite fun to see that, and to see them get back together on the racetrack again. I think we really wanted to see a Lewis and Verstappen fight after last season, which is not happening so far. Maybe we'll get lucky next season, who knows. But if we look a bit further down the placing order, where everybody finished, a really, really strong race for McLaren. And obviously, in contrast to Alpine's performance in the race, where they had 2 DNFs. And of course, that means that McLaren, who are, really, really pushing now for that 4th place, that's what they're talking about in the Constructors' Championship, them fighting against Alpine. And we want to see them pushing and fighting, of course, but that means that McLaren have now moved up into 4th place ahead of Alpine because of the amount of points that they picked up, coming 4th and 5th, even a rare points finish for Daniel Ricciardo there, and Alpine not scoring any. I think that's a battle we're going to have to look out for. I think it's likely that the Constructors' Championship is pretty set for the top 3, Red Bull, Ferrari, then Mercedes. You could argue there's a battle between Ferrari and Mercedes, but I'm not so sure about that. But we've got that battle for 4th place. McLaren and Alpine, of course, in a bit of a ding-dong with Oscar Piastri and Ricciardo moving from there to McLaren initially a couple of years ago. And so there's a bit more to that fight than just the battle for 4th place. There is maybe a small rivalry developing there. But that was a good result for McLaren. I have to say again as well, Lando and Daniel both, I thought, drove really well, keeping the car on the track. Obviously, I know that's a prerequisite for a Formula 1 driver. You want to be able to keep the car on the track. It shouldn't be anything spectacular that they do that. But I did think that, considering what we've seen from Daniel Ricciardo this season, where he's not been racing very well, and we know that Lando Norris, I think, is a very good driver, it was just good to see that for the McLaren team. And, of course, Aston Martin as well, who have had an abysmal season, let's be honest. Truly not what we expected. I mean, if anybody saw our welcome videos for Aston Martin with Chris and I when we found out they were joining the sport, I think, we all thought they were going to be battling near the top. Given the fact that they were taking over a team who were winning races, in Racing Point, and yet they're 7th in the championship. They're quite far behind Alfa Romeo, 15 points behind Alfa Romeo in the Constructors' Championship, with Alfa in 6th and Aston Martin in 7th. They're only 3 points ahead of both Haas and AlphaTauri. A bad race weekend for them could mean they drop back down to 9th place in the table. And that's really, I don't think, where Lance Stroll expected his team to be. And obviously, I know Vettel got passed later on or towards the end of the race by Max Verstappen, so he couldn't quite get that 6th and 7th place. But I think they'll be pleased with that, considering the season that they've had. And again, Hamilton, ending up in the wall did help them out as well. But I think that we want to see this kind of mixed grid, don't we? We want to see these different teams just getting some points up on the board. I think it's important to mention as well that Alonso was having a decent race. He was doing what he seems to do best these days and was holding people up until he retired. So it was interesting to see the dynamic there. I think that with Alonso, he knows how to get his car further up the grid. I do think Alpine have got the 4th best car on the grid this season. I think they are slightly better than McLaren. But McLaren have been kind of slowly clawing it back. And also maybe McLaren are dealing with the fact that they've got a team member who is very out of form, who's not consistently scoring points. Alpine, generally Alonso and Ocon, they tend to match each other pretty well. I think that's evidenced in the fact that Ocon is 8th in the championship and Fernando Alonso is 9th in the championship. There's just 7 points that separate them. So they're relatively consistent. Whereas if you look at the gap between Lando Norris, who's in 7th in the championship, who's on 100 points, and Daniel Ricciardo, who's down in 11th on 29 points. And of course, he didn't have that many points before this weekend as well. So the gap between them was even larger. It's increased even more now because Lando did finish ahead of Ricciardo. But, Daniel Ricciardo's points didn't look as respectable as they maybe do now. And so perhaps you could argue that McLaren have got a better car than Alpine. Just they're missing a driver, basically. But Alpine, I've been quite impressed with them, considering that they seem like they're a team in a bit of turmoil. That they don't have a second driver yet. They've lost several people. They weren't able to keep a hold of Daniel Ricciardo. They weren't even able to keep hold of somebody who was in their academy system who's coming through. And so it's not looking particularly good. And maybe there's a little bit of chaos going on up top as well. But I would certainly say that they look like they've got a good car. If they can build on that for next year, then maybe we're looking at something interesting. And then, of course, whoever is going to be that second driver, whoever that might be, will have a good opportunity. Personally, I'd like to see Pierre Gasly move to Alpine. I think it would be a good move for him, regardless of how the car is next year. It's not going to be an absolute dog like Williams, I don't think. I don't think they'll drop off the radar, as much as Aston Martin have done or anything like that. So I really think that it's still going to be a decent car next season. And I think that if Pierre Gasly was to move there, it would be a good move for his career. Could be a little springboard for him in the future to maybe get a job further up in the top teams. He's still young enough to be able to get those moves. So I think that would be really nice. And I think just to finish off, maybe a final word on Nicholas Latifi. I think it's time to go. And that's all, I think, for today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully, Chris will be back for our next Grand Prix this weekend in Japan. We may well be talking about Verstappen as a new 2-time world champion. We'll see what happens. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. Please do like and subscribe if you feel the need to do so. But also leave some comments. I think for us at the moment, obviously likes and subscriptions are really important, and trying to get the podcast out there and talking to other people who have done YouTube channels. We know that's important. But I think for us as well, comments are something that we're genuinely interested in. We are Formula One fans, and we love talking about Formula One, and anybody else who wants to join in that conversation, we are more than happy to talk to them about what they think. So it would be lovely to read a couple of comments and to see if we can add that into our show. But thank you so much for listening, and we will see you all again next time.